Yes. All right. Sorry, I had to get some dinner after lab. I'm not trying to interest anybody in my Chipotle. Okay. I promise that this time we're going to make up the 5 minutes that we lost last time setting up. So yeah. All right, so we finished all the way through 6.1. Now we're on page 217, or if you're online, section 6.1b, how attitudes are formed. Okay, so I'm going to get my notes up. All right, there they are. I'm not going to tap on the laptop, so it's non-issue. Okay. What is going on here? Okay. All right. Sorry about that. All right. Okay. So let's go through this. How did you become liberal or conservative in your political views? Why do you favor or oppose same-sex marriage? What draws you toward or away from organized religion? Are attitudes inherited? One hypothesis, first advanced by Adam Tesser in 1993, is that strong likes and dislikes are rooted in our genetic makeup. Research shows that on some issues, the attitudes of identical twins are more similar than those of fraternal twins, and that twins raised apart are as similar to each other as those of fraternal twins, and that twins raised apart are similar to each other as those who are raised in the same home. I think I read that wrong. Yeah, I did. Research shows that on some issues, the attitude of identical twins are more similar than those of fraternal twins, and that twins raised apart are as similar to each other as those who are raised in the same home. This pattern of evidence suggests that people may be predisposed to hold certain attitudes. Indeed, Tesser found that when asked about attitudes, sorry, okay, so I don't know if this is infrared or not, but I have one of these for our fan light in the office, and I think one of our neighbors has one too, and they might be on the same frequency, so my fan just randomly turns on, and I don't know how to fix it. Okay, so if you see me get a little distracted because of that, sorry. Yeah. Indeed, Tesser found that when asked about attitudes for which there seems to be a predisposition, such as attitudes towards sexual promiscuity, religion, and the death penalty, research participants were quicker to respond and less likely to alter their views toward social norms. Tesser speculated that individuals are disposed to hold certain strong attitudes as a result of inborn physical, sensory, and cognitive skills, temperament, and personality traits. Okay. Other twin studies too, as well as complex comparisons within extended families, have supported the notion that people differ in their attitudes towards a range of social and political issues, in part because of genetically rooted differences in their biological makeup. There are some different ways in which a person's inborn tendencies may influence social and political attitudes. In one study, for example, researchers brought 40 adults with strong political views into the lab for testing and found that those who physiologically were highly reactive to sudden noise and other unpleasant stimuli were more likely to favor capital punishment, the right to bear arms, defense spending, and other policies seen as protective against domestic and foreign threats. Okay, so there's a lot in there, and I've read 2 paragraphs together, but I don't really feel like there's anything of those specific paragraphs. I'm getting really distracted, I'm sorry. That needs to be highlighted. Maybe just a little mark to denote that it's a study or studies done that might be influential on a quiz or exam later. I take that back. I'm going to underline the research shows on some issues of attitudes, identical twins, that whole sentence. And then on the next page, individuals are disposed to hold certain strong attitudes as a result of inborn physical. Okay, we're just gonna have the fan on. I don't know if it bothers you, if you can even hear it. We're just gonna have the fan on. Why does it bother me so much? Okay, next paragraph. I gotta get through this. Our attitudes learned. Whatever dispositions nature provides to us, our most cherished attitudes often form as a result of our exposure to attitude objects, our history of rewards and punishments, the attitudes that our parents, friends, and enemies express, the social and cultural context in which we live, and other types of experiences. Yeah, I think I'm going to highlight that whole thing. That's pretty potent. I think that's going to be important. In a classic naturalistic study, Theodore Newcomb in 1943 surveyed the political attitudes of students at Bennington College in Vermont. At the time, Bennington was a women's college that drew its students from conservative and mostly affluent families. Once there, however, the students encountered professors and older peers who held more liberal views. Newcomb found that as the women moved from their first year to graduation, they became progressively more liberal. In the 1936 presidential election, 62% of first-year Bennington students preferred the Republican Landon to the Democrat Roosevelt, compared to only 43 of sophomores and 15 of juniors and seniors. Interesting. This link between cultural environment and attitudes is particularly evident in the current political landscape of America. A house divided into red states and blue states by geography, culture, and ideology. Clearly, attitudes are formed. Actually, I'm not going to highlight any of that. I think that's an interesting study, but I don't think it's going to greatly impact it. But just in case, I'll put the little study sign. Clearly, attitudes are formed through basic processes of learning. For example, many studies have shown that people can form strong positive and negative attitudes towards neutral objects that somehow are linked to emotionally charged stimuli. At the start of the 20th century, Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov, in 1927, discovered that dogs would naturally and reflexively salivate in response to food in the mouth. He then discovered that by repeatedly ringing a bell, a neutral stimulus, Before the food was placed in the mouth, the dog would eventually start to salivate at the sound of the bell itself. This process, by which organisms learn to associate a once neutral stimulus with an inherently positive or negative response, is a basic and powerful form of learning. In fact, Pavlov found that once a dog was conditioned to salivate to one tone, it went to generalize by responding to other sounds that were similar but not identical. Okay, so that I think is important. Those last two sentences, but specifically the second to last, this process by which organisms learn to associate. It is now clear that this form of learning can help to explain the development of social attitudes. In a classic first study, college students were presented with a list of adjectives that indicate nationality: German, Swedish, Dutch, Italian, French, Greek, each of which was repeatedly presented with words that were known to have very pleasant or unpleasant connotations. So, pleasant, happy, gift, sacred, or bitter, ugly, failure. When the participants later evaluated the nationalities by name, they were more positive in their ratings of those that had been paired with pleasant words than with unpleasant words. That was a study done in 1958. And as discovered by Pavlov nearly 100 years ago, research shows that when an attitude is changed toward one subject, attitudes towards similar and related objects are more often changed as well. Hmm. This can help explain development of social attitudes. The first sentence, I think, is pretty imperative. And the second half of the last one, research shows that when attitude is changed toward one, similar related objects are often changed as well. More recent studies of evaluative conditioning have shown that implicit and explicit attitudes towards neutral objects can form by their association with positive and negative stimuli. So that is a key term. All right. That's why political leaders all over the world wrap themselves in a national flag to derive a benefit from positive associations, while advertisers strategically pair their products with sexy models, uplifting music, celebrities, nostalgic images, and other positive emotional symbols. In a series of laboratory studies, researchers found that people came to prefer brands of a consumer product that were paired with humorous ads more than those that were associated with non-humorous ads. Yeah, I don't think that needs anything else other than the term in that section. So now that I have taken notes for this whole section, I am going to type them in my how attitudes are formed in my notes. So I'm just going to make a note of research. On twins and genetic component to attitudes. All right, the next one is whatever dispositions nature provides to us are most cherished. Why am I typing on the thing again? I said I wasn't going to do that. short memory. Okay. Whatever dispositions nature provides to us are most cherished attitudes. I am not prepared today. Oh my gosh, what did I do? Attitudes often form as a result of our exposure to attitude objects. Our history of rewards and punishments the attitudes that our parents, friends, and enemies express the social and cultural context. I'm gonna out you in a second. My husband is trying to distract me. And other types of experiences. Okay. As a result of, I think I'm going to make those sub bullets. So, whatever dispositions nature provides to us, our most cherished attitudes often form as a result of sub point, our exposure to attitude objects, sub point, our history of rewards and punishments, sub point, the attitudes that our parents, friends, and enemies express. And so, oh, one more. Okay, social and cultural context. And other types of experiences, whatever other types of experiences is. Okay. All right. The next one was okay, Pavlov. That's pretty important. This process by which organisms learn to associate a once neutral stimulus with an inherently positive or negative. I think that's critical. I have a feeling there's going to be it's Pavlov. An inherently positive or negative response is a basic and powerful form of learning. Okay. I might highlight this in my notes just so I know. Okay. Can help to explain the development of social attitudes. And then I'm going to put evaluative conditioning separate from Pavlov. Should I? Seems like it's similar. Yeah, I'm gonna, that's gonna be part of Pavlov. All right, evaluative conditioning. I'm gonna bold that. I know that that is a key term. All right, a process by which we form an attitude toward a neutral stimulus because of its association with a positive or negative person, place, or things. Okay. That's almost verbatim what we wrote earlier. That kind of irritates me. Okay. Next section, link between attitudes and behavior. Okay. People take for granted the notion that attitudes influence behavior. We assume that voters' opinions of opposing candidates predict the decisions they will make on election day, and that consumer preferences for one product over competing products will influence the purchases they make, and that feelings of prejudice will trigger bad acts of discrimination. Yet, as sensible as these assumptions seem, the link between attitudes and behavior has proved far from perfect. I'm going to highlight that. Sociologist Richard Lapierre in 1934 was the first to notice that attitudes and behavior don't always go hand in hand. In the 30s, during the height of the Great Depression, Lapierre took a young Chinese American couple on a 3-month, 10,000-mile car trip, visiting 250 restaurants, campgrounds, and hotels across the United States. Although prejudice against Asians was widespread at the time, the couple was refused service only once. Yet, when Lapierre wrote back to the places they had visited and asked if they would accept Chinese patrons, more than 90% of those who returned an answer said they would not. Self-reported attitudes did not correspond with behavior. This study was provocative, but seriously flawed. Lapierre measured attitudes several months after his trip, and during that time, the attitudes may have changed. He also did not know whether those who responded to his letter were the same people who had greeted the couple in person. It was even possible that the Chinese couple were served wherever they went because they were accompanied by Lapierre, or because businesses were desperate during hard economic times. Despite these limitations, I'm going to put on here a little sign because there's a lot involved in this study, and they're talking about multiple different third variables or lurking variables or confounding variables, depending on who you're talking to. Okay, so despite these limitations, Lapierre's study was the first of many to reveal a lack of correspondence between attitudes and behavior. In 1969, Alan Wicker reviewed the applicable research and concluded that attitudes and behavior are correlated only weakly, if at all. Sobered by this conclusion, researchers were puzzled. Could it be that the votes we cast do not follow our political opinions? That consumers' purchases are not based on their attitudes towards a product, or that discrimination is not related to underlying prejudice? Is the study of attitudes useless to those interested in human social behavior? I like that. Not at all. During subsequent years, researchers went on to identify the conditions under which attitudes and behavior are correlated. Thus, When Stephen Krauss in 1995 meta-analyzed all of this research, he concluded that attitudes significantly and substantially predict future behavior. I have a feeling that that's going to be big. I'm going to highlight his name even and that whole sentence and put the little symbol next to it because I have a feeling that's big. Especially when they thought so much couldn't do anything for social behavior studies anymore. Yeah, that's pretty big. Okay. So after that, it says, in fact, he calculated that there would have to be 60,983 new studies reporting a zero correlation before this conclusion would have to be revised. Wow. Based on a meta-analysis of 41 additional studies, Laura Glassman and Dolores Albaccarin in 2000, Albarakin, there we go, in 2006, went on to identify some of the conditions under which attitudes most clearly predict future behavior. So, attitudes and context. One important condition is the level of correspondence. Actually, I'm going to have to do that. This is a subsection. So, link between attitudes and behavior. Okay. The attitudes in context. Okay. One important condition is the level of correspondence or similarity between attitude, measures, and behavior. Perhaps the reason that Lapierre in 1934 did not find a correlation between self-reported prejudice and discrimination was that he had asked proprietors about Asians in general, but then observed their actions towards only one couple. To predict a single act of discrimination, he should have measured people's more specific attitudes towards a young, well-dressed, attractive Chinese couple accompanied by an American professor. Isaac Ashton and Martin Fishbein in 1977 analyzed more than 100 studies and found that attitudes correlate with behavior only when attitude measures closely match the behavior in question. Illustrating the point, Andrew Davidson and James Jacquard in 1979 tried to use attitudes to predict whether women would use birth control pills within the next 2 years. Attitudes were measured in a series of questions ranging from very general, like, how do you feel about birth control, to very specific. How do you feel about using birth control pills during the next 2 years? The more specific the initial attitude question was, the better it predicted the behavior. Other researchers have replicated this finding, such as Krauss in 1995. Okay, so I'm going to highlight, that was 2 paragraphs again, I'm sorry about that. What do I think is most important about that? Okay, I'm going to highlight one important condition is the level of correspondence or similarity between the attitude, measures, and behavior. And then the last one, the more specific the initial attitude question was, the better it predicted the behavior. Okay, so a link between our feelings and our actions should also be placed within a broader context. Attitudes are one determinant of social behavior, but there are other determinants as well. This limitation formed the basis for Fishbein's 1980 theory of reasoned action, which Ashton in 1991 later expanded into his theory of planned behavior. According to these theories, our attitudes influence our behavior through a process of deliberate decision making, and their impact is limited in four respects. First, just described, behavior is influenced less by general attitudes than by attitudes towards a specific behavior. I am gonna highlight that. Oh no. Hold on. Yeah. Behavior is influenced less by general attitudes than by attitudes toward a specific behavior. Second, behavior is influenced not only by attitudes, but also subjective norms. What our beliefs about what others think we should do. Sorry. I'm going to put it down. I'll highlight after. Calm down. It's just, there's a lot in this one. I'm having a hard time not highlighting every sentence. Okay, as we'll see in chapter 7, social pressures to conform often lead us to behave in ways that are at odds with our inner convictions. Third, according to Ajzen, attitudes give rise to behavior only when we perceive the behavior to be within our control. Yep. Attitudes give rise. To the extent that people lack confidence in their ability to engage in some behavior, they are unlikely to form an intention to do so. And then fourth, although attitudes, along with subjective norms, perceived control, contribute to an intention to behave in a particular manner, people often do not or cannot follow through on their intentions. Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to highlight behavior is influenced less by all the way to the end of the sentence. Second, I'm going to highlight behavior is influenced not only by attitudes, but also by subjective norms. Attitudes give rise to behavior only when we perceive the behavior to be within our control. And fourth, although attitudes contribute to an intention, people often do not or cannot follow through. Okay. Yep, all four of those points, very important. Okay, a good deal of research now supports the theories of reasoned action and planned behavior, as well as more recent refinements of these perspectives. Indeed, this general approach, which places the link between attitudes and behaviors within a broader context, has successfully been used to predict a wide range of practical behaviors, such as using condoms, washing hands, and other food safety habits, donating blood, complying with medical regimens, and reducing risky sexual behaviors. All of the notes. I love when you read something and it's got like 2 lines worth of references to specific studies, multiple of them. Okay, so in this paragraph, I think the best sentence indeed, this general approach, which places the link between it on a broader context, has successfully been used in a wide range of practical behaviors. I'm not going to highlight all of the practical behaviors because when I read it later and type it up, I'm just going to make those little bullets on the end. Okay, strength of the attitude. According to the theories of reasoned action and planned behavior, specific attitudes combine with social factors to produce behavior. Sometimes attitudes have more influence on behavior than do the other factors. Sometimes they have less. In large part, it depends on the importance or strength of the attitude. Each of us has some views that are near and dear to the heart than others. Computer jocks become attached to PC laptops or Apple iPads. Religious fundamentalists express deep concerns about issues pertaining to life and death. And political activists have fiery passions for one political party or policy over others. In each case, the attitude is held with great confidence and is difficult to change. Okay. I think the first sentence is the most important here. And the second. All right. Why are some attitudes stronger than others? David Boninger and others in 1995 identified 3 psychological factors that consistently seem to distinguish between our strongest and weakest attitudes. These investigators asked people to reflect on their views toward defense spending, gun control, the legalization of marijuana, abortion rights, and other issues. They found that the attitudes people held most passionately were those that concerned issues that 1, directly affected their own self interests, 2, related to deeply held philosophical, political, and religious values, were of, and were of concern to their close friends, family, and social in-groups. This last highly social point is important. Research shows that when people are surrounded by others who are like-minded, the attitudes they hold are stronger and more resistant to change. So, I mean, that makes sense. It's the whole idea of the echo chamber. If you're only hanging out with people that agree with you on something, not only do you all agree, but you become this echo chamber, and it's like a feedback loop when you have a mic too close to an amp and it starts creating that sound and just feeding through. It's just going to make everything more potent. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, I'm going to highlight that there are 3 physiological factors that consistently seem to distinguish between our strongest and weakest. All right. Attitudes people held most passionately were, highlight all 3. And then the last one. When people are surrounded by others who are like-minded, the attitudes they hold are stronger and more resistant to change. Okay. Several factors indicate the strength of an attitude and its link to behavior. One is that people tend to behave in ways that are consistent with their attitudes when they are well informed. For example, college students were asked which of 2 candidates they preferred in an upcoming local election for mayor. Those who knew the factual campaign issues were later the most likely to actually vote for their favorite candidate. In another study, college students were questioned about their views on various environmental issues and later were asked to take action, to sign petitions, participate in a recycling project, and so on. Again, the more informed the students were, the more consistent their attitudes about the environment were with their behavior. I think just the second one. People tend to behave in ways that are consistent with their attitudes when they are well informed. Or you could highlight the last sentence because it pretty much says it's the same thing. All right, the strength of an attitude is indicated not only by the amount of information on which it is based, but also how that information is acquired. Research shows that attitudes are more stable and more predictive of behavior when they're born of direct personal experience than when they're based on indirect secondhand information. In a series of experiments, for example, Russell Fazio and Mark Zana in 1981 introduced two groups of participants to a set of puzzles. One group worked on same puzzles. The other group merely watched someone else work on them. All participants were then asked to rate their interest in the puzzles, attitude, and were given an opportunity to spend time on them, behavior. As it turned out, attitudes and behavior were more consistent among participants who had previously sampled the puzzles, i.e., I guess watching someone else work on something and being able to be around it are two different things. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so I think the first two sentences again are important, but I'm not going to highlight the whole thing. I think the first sentence, yes, the strength of an attitude is indicated. That whole thing. And then attitudes are more stable and more predictive of behavior when they're born. Okay. Third, an attitude can be strengthened, ironically, by an attack against it from a persuasive message. According to Zachary Tormala and Richard Petty in 2002, people hold attitudes with varying degrees of certainty, and they become more confident in their positions after they successfully resist changing that attitude in response to a persuasive communication. In one study, researchers confronted university students with an unpopular proposal to add senior comprehensive exams as a graduation requirement. Each student read a pro-exam argument that was described as strong or weak, after which they were asked to write down counter-arguments and indicate their attitude toward the policy. The result? Students who continued to oppose the policy despite reading what they thought to be a strong argument became even more certain of their opinion. I've met people like that. So many people like that, especially on the internet when you have so many trolls and they don't really have much information to back the kinds of alleged facts that they have. And you just hit them with research article after research article of this is where you can find information on this point that you brought up, totally valid question on this point, this point, this point, this point. Here's the information. You can make a better decision on this one idea. And their response to that is, well, I know what I know. Or something just as asinine, and then they're like, haha, see, I told them. Drives me crazy. Which is why I don't get in arguments with trolls on the internet anymore. Anyway, I'm going to highlight that first sentence. An attitude can be strengthened by an attack against it with a persuasive message. People hold attitudes with varying degrees of certainty. Actually, I don't think I need that first one. I think just that second one. People hold attitudes with varying degrees of certainty and they become more confident in their positions after they've successfully resisted changing that attitude in response to a persuasive communication. Yeah. Yeah. That's a thing. How are we doing? Okay. I've gotten really distracted today. Okay. I think I'm just too tired for this after labs. I think I need to study this during the day because I am half only halfway through what I intended to get done today, and I'm at 45 minutes. Know your limitations, guys. I think I'm going to call it a day. I'm going to do some more tomorrow. Don't fight